Dr. Enric Sala is an unusual combination of scholar, activist, and storyteller who will share his passion for the ocean and its varied life forms in today's talk. This summer, he published The Nature of Nature: Why We Need the Wild, a smartly written book based on his vast field experiences. The book explains how the natural world works, how humans are unraveling these processes, and what steps we can take to improve matters. Born in Spain, Enric studied ecology in Spain and France, earning a PhD from the University of Aix-Marseille. He then taught at Scripps Institute of Oceanography in California for several years, but left his academic post when he concluded that, quote, "I was describing how ocean life was dying with more and more precision, but not offering a cure." Since 2008, he has been an explorer in residence at the National Geographic Society. One of his major accomplishments at NGS is leading the Pristine Seas program, which aims to expand the number of protected marine areas around the world. Thus, we could think of no better contributor to Geography 2050 than Dr. Sala. Enric, welcome to the conference. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Marie. It's a pleasure to be in the cyberspace with you.
Before we begin our discussion, I'd like to introduce the book and Enric a little bit more with this short video.
Too few who can feel, I am the sea, and the sea is me.
Growing up in Catalonia in the 1970s, every Sunday I would sit in front of La Caja Tonta, the dumb box, watching my hero, Jacques Cousteau. The exotic places, the daring underwater explorers, the spectacular creatures. It was all I wanted to do with my life. And sometimes dreams do come true. Now, I've traveled the world many times over, falling in love with nature over and over again. Following in my hero's footsteps. But a lot has changed since Cousteau's time. In 2019, I explored nearshore waters of Costa Rica. The unprotected areas where Cousteau might have found a thriving ecosystem were barren. A few small fish and no sharks. The top predators that should be hunting here, like lions in the savannah. What nature has taken millennia to create, we humans have destroyed in only a few generations. Here, I could be anywhere on our planet where life isn't protected or valued. These beautiful places are incredibly fragile. And without them, we will not survive. I am Dr. Enric Sala, a National Geographic explorer, and like many of you around the world, I have been spending my time at home to help stop the spread of COVID-19. The pandemic has been keeping me from doing what I love, exploring the ocean. 12 years ago, I started the Pristine Seas project at National Geographic, which uses a combination of research and media to help convince government leaders to create marine protected areas in their waters. The need to protect our wild places on land as well as underwater couldn't be more urgent. To understand why we are suddenly at a crossroads when our grandparents' generation seemed to live in a time of abundance requires some quick historical perspective. The way we fished, farmed, raised livestock, and developed the land was, for centuries and even millennia, done at a pace that did not have global consequences. But everything changed with the Industrial Revolution. In just the past couple hundred years, we got so good, so fast, at extracting these same resources at scales once unimaginable, that the consequences are biting back at us. Those of us who study these connections see again and again that where biodiversity is destroyed, ecosystems break down, with unintended and disastrous consequences. In the eastern United States, humans hunting the gray wolf to extinction caused a chain reaction that likely led to the epidemic of Lyme disease that persists to this day. The devastating Indonesian tsunami of 2004 was made far more destructive because of the cutting of mangrove forests, which normally act as a shield, buffering the impact of storm waves. In the Line Islands in the Central Pacific, the waters in overfished areas were filled with pathogens, including bacteria like Vibrio, which can cause cholera in humans. Bottom trawling the seafloor, clearing forests in the Amazon, and melting permafrost in the Arctic are all releasing tons and tons of carbon into our atmosphere. And in Wuhan, China, a virus that would have dispersed itself naturally in a biodiverse environment instead made its way to humans, likely from bats, animals whose habitats have been systematically raided and destroyed for decades. These examples just scratch the surface of how humanity's reckless relationship with nature has had disastrous effects. My life has been dedicated to figuring out how we can have thriving natural ecosystems and resilient human populations together. What I found is nothing short of miraculous. Remember the desolate waters I explored off Costa Rica? Well, just 10 miles from the coast is an island called Isla del Coronado. The difference is stark, and it's no accident. Here, the waters are fully protected. No fishing to stress the ecosystem toward collapse. Natural checks and balances keep predator and prey in a sustainable balance. It's a strong, resilient, constantly regenerating environment. The abundance of marine life spills over invisible boundaries, creating more catch for local fishermen, food security for communities, and increased tourism revenue from world travelers who want to experience these treasures firsthand. This one truth is at the heart of my life's work, where biodiversity is allowed to flourish, healthy ecosystems thrive, and we all benefit. Protecting intact ecosystems works because it allows nature to do the hard work for us. Our natural world can be a sustainable, resilient engine of regeneration. We just need to give it some space. Reintroducing wolves to Yellowstone National Park in the 1990s caused a positive cascade throughout the food web, leading to a return of plants and animals of all kinds, creating a more diverse and balanced ecosystem. During a cyclone in Mozambique in 2019, the Gorongosa National Park absorbed the rainwater equivalent of 800,000 Olympic swimming pools, protecting many populated areas from the worst of the flooding. In the pristine southern Line Islands, giant clams are abundant. These incredible animals, which are overfished in much of the Pacific, are like the N95 masks of the coral reef lagoons. Like other marine animals, they filter bacteria and pathogens, including Vibrio, out of the water. And leaving wild animals in the wild and their habitats intact helps to keep viruses from arriving on our doorstep. So on top of providing us with oxygen, food, carbon sequestration, recreation, and spiritual inspiration, nature is also shielding us from disease and natural disasters. My team and I have spent over a decade bringing this message to world leaders and decision makers who have the power to change policy and create protections for nature. 1 year after I came to Washington, D.C. to launch Pristine Seas with National Geographic, I found myself sitting in the White House as the President of the United States signed a proclamation creating the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monuments, one of the largest marine reserves in the world. I couldn't believe that our research, our images, our stories about that place helped to inform one of the most important ocean policy decisions in the history of the United States. But my next thought was, we can do this again. 12 years later, we've done this 22 times. We've helped to protect almost 6 million square kilometers of ocean. And we can do the same on the land. We must protect the critical wilderness areas we depend on. Our target is ambitious, 30% of the planet protected by 2030. But Pristine Seas has proven that thinking big can pay off. I dream of the day we can all be in nature again, perhaps with a deeper understanding of its importance. It's not too much to say that if we protect nature, she will protect us as well. That's life in balance. That's why we need the wild.
All right. Question 1, you ready?
I am ready.
In The Nature of Nature, you make the case that we need to expand protected places on land and in the ocean for economic, biological, and even moral reasons. Given that the future of the world ocean is the theme of Geography 2050, we'll focus on marine environments in this discussion. You outline the concept of keystone species, which are species that, if they are removed, the biological community changes dramatically, becoming less diverse. What are the keystone species that you focus on when assessing the biological health of the oceans, Enric?
Yeah, imagine that you go to a coral reef and jump in the water. If you see sharks immediately, that means that that coral reef is in good ecological health. We need the top predators because most keystone species are the top predators on top of the food web. But they don't all need to be large like the sharks. They can be little and cute like the sea otters on the Pacific coast of North America. Sea otters love to eat sea urchins, and sea urchins love to eat kelp. They are like underwater lawn mowers. If their abundance is really high, they can turn kelp forests, these giant kelp forests, which are like the redwoods of the sea, they can turn them into barren grounds, just eating everything away. So you have the sea otters eating the sea urchins, means that there are very few sea urchins. The kelp can grow and provide the home for all these other species of plants and animals that are living there. This is why we need that keystone. The sea otter is like the stone on top of the architectural arch that keeps it together. If you remove that stone, the entire arch collapses.
I like that metaphor a lot. Enrique, you're probably one of the few people that gets excited when you jump into the water and see sharks. But in addition to sharks, you make a convincing case that whales help fertilize shallow water by releasing iron in their feces that promote phytoplankton, which support krill and other species, which led me to wonder, how are whale populations today, and are there marine areas where they are adequately protected?
Yeah, whales are still recovering from the industrial slaughter in the 20th century and before. In the 20th century alone, man killed 3 million whales around the world. And these animals, these huge consumers of plankton, they can eat deeper. Like a sperm whale, for example, they can eat a giant squid down to 3,000 feet, and then they come back to the surface. The big whales, the baleen whales, like the blue whale or the humpback whales, they eat plankton and very small fish and krill. And yeah, as you said, krill has iron in their tissues, and as the whales eat and then poop part of the iron outside, they fertilize the shallow waters. Without whales, the open ocean would be a desert, and they help to fertilize, they help to bring life. Unfortunately, the most whale populations haven't recovered to historical levels. Now we're talking maybe about a few 100,000 whales around the world, when they used to be millions. So we still have a long way, and some of these species live very long lives, 50, 60, 70 years. In the case of the bowhead whales in the Arctic, they can be more than 100 years old. So it's going to take a long time to bring them back.
I grew up along the coast of California, and I remember seeing the whale migrations going north to south, and it always was a beautiful sight to see them. I do think humans, though, we humans have a terrestrial bias when we consider conservation. It's easier to walk through a forest and recognize what happens when it's cut down than to appreciate what happens to the seafloor after an industrial trawler has been dragged across it. So how do we increase this understanding of marine ecosystems so that people recognize the negative impact we're having on the oceans, and that healthy oceans are vital for our survival?
It's more difficult than going to a forest, right? Everybody can walk in a forest, but not everybody can dive or get in a submarine and see the damage. So we have to bring that world to them. This is why we at National Geographic and Pristine Seas, we bring these places to people and to leaders so they understand how unique and rich and wonderful they are. And also we need to show the damage. When I was a professor at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, I thought that having scientific papers would be enough, right? The political leaders, decision makers will look at the scientific data and make decisions based on this, but clearly that's not the case. And so we need to make it emotional, And there is a wonderful example right now on Netflix. That is this latest documentary by David Attenborough, "A Life on Our Planet," and it's his story, his personal story, his life story, how he saw life from thriving to being depleted all over the world, and why this is such an existential crisis for humanity, and what we need to do to fix it. So I think that the data are not enough. We need to put a human face so people will relate to.
You tell a wonderful story in the book about how you worked with the president of Gabon, taking him out on a ship and having him run a rove. And in that process of the rove navigating on the seafloor, a troop of really large dogfish groupers were staring into the rove. And this just excited his imagination and appreciation for his territorial waters. So I'm asking you, is providing world leaders such firsthand exposure, is that an effective conservation strategy?
Oh, absolutely. There is invariably, if you take a leader to a wonderful natural place, be it a tropical forest or a natural grasslands with lots of herbivores, or a kelp forest or a coral reef, invariably they fall in love with it. Well, I can think of a few politicians right now in the US who would not be impressed by nature, but the rest of the world, the rest of humanity would. And you can see their faces. It's like they become children again, because we have what E.O. Wilson calls biophilia. We have this innate love for the natural world. We have this craving, this desire to be out there. And the pandemic, right, the COVID pandemic has made it very clear. Everybody wanted to be out. Everybody was fascinated by these videos of animals coming back to cities or near our shores. So absolutely, first-hand experience, first-hand exposure to wonderful natural places is the best way for leaders to fall in love with these places. And once they fall in love with them, intuitively, they know they have to do something to protect them.
Mm-hmm. Making an economic argument that protected areas will increase the availability of marine resources in nearby areas that are not protected seems like a win-win situation. Yet the evidence is not always persuasive, as you found out in talking to people. So how do you convince the skeptics, say a minister of fisheries in a developing country, that protecting areas is good for business?
Yes. We have so many examples. This is one of the trickiest things we do, right? Because we have the data, we have the science, we have the economics. So the facts are very clear, right? But fisheries is one of the most corrupt sectors on the planet, especially industrial fisheries. The coastal artisanal fishermen, that's a completely different world, and many of them have a great understanding of their environment. But the big industrial fishing fleets, like these super trawlers that are 360 feet long, nets so huge that they could fit a dozen 747 jets in them. One pass of the net destroys deep coral reefs that are thousands of years old. And these guys don't have any regard to about nature. They are there for the short-term profit. So in many cases, they are in cahoots with the fisheries departments. And fisheries departments are some of the most corrupt departments in governments worldwide. So how to break that? Well, one way is exposing the illegalities of industrial fishing, showing to the country, to their fellow citizens, how they are collapsing their fisheries and harming their livelihoods. And in some cases, when you're dealing with a few good ones, you have to provide the right incentives, right? It's not just showing the scientific data. But yeah, we are having a hard time always with the fisheries ministers, because they side with industry, which, despite the lip service to sustainability, continue over-exploiting the ocean.
Mm-hmm. One of the great things about your book is that even if you're an oceanography expert, you're going to learn things. So I think most of us can imagine that the oceans are places that are polluted with our plastics and oil spills and dumping. But reading your book made me aware that there's a problem of acoustic pollution in the ocean. So how is increased noise damaging to marine life? And are there any guidelines surrounding acoustic pollution?
There are a few ways acoustic pollution, increased noise in the ocean affects marine life. Of course, the most evident is whales. Whales and dolphins use noise to communicate underwater, like the beautiful humpback whale with these eerie songs that can propagate for hundreds of kilometers because they sing in low frequency. They have songs that change from year to year and between populations. They have this singing culture. It's extraordinary. Of course, when you add seismic testing, which produces these explosions every few seconds for days nonstop, basically destroys their hearing system, destroys their communication system. Also, the increased noise of cities and shipping in some coastal areas is making it very, very difficult for the whales to be able to find each other, to reproduce with each other, which only harms their ability to replenish. And then there are other things like, for example, little reef fish, the fish that live in the coral reef and they reproduce, they release eggs and sperm in the water, and then the eggs hatch, the larvae float for a while, and then when the fish larvae are large enough, then they come back to the reef hearing the noise of the reef. Right? When you add all of that noise pollution, like outside the Great Barrier Reef, for example, with these huge cargo ships that transport coal from Australia to China, all that noise is making it very difficult for the fish to be able to hear the reef and replenish the reef. So there are all these effects that we didn't think about that propagate like the sound across the ocean.
Hmm. You know, in this symposium, we'll have a session that deals with patrolling the seas, which is a challenging task. Designating a protected marine area, which you have advocated, is only the beginning of a process. Who are the monitors of protected areas, and how effectively are marine protected areas actually protected?
The countries of the world, the governments are the monitors. Most of the areas protected in the world, like 99% of the area protected in the world, is within the 200 miles exclusive economic zones of countries. It is countries that decide which areas to protect, and they have the responsibility for monitoring them. We have tens of thousands of marine protected areas today, and about 7% of the ocean is in areas that have been designated or proposed for protection. But less than 3% of the ocean is in areas that are fully protected from fishing or other damaging activities. And most of the marine protected areas are not well managed. Many of them don't have a management plan, they don't have a budget, they don't have personnel. And what's still worse, there are some areas, like in the United Kingdom, where trolling is allowed, including by super trawlers, these ships that are more than 300 feet long. So most of the protected areas we have in the world are kind of a joke. They are just lines on a paper. But the good news is that when they are well managed, they work very well. I have seen it. I have seen it with my own eyes. That you protect them and marine life recovers spectacularly.
Yeah, I noticed that Canada has recently expanded its marine protected areas, and I guess it is not just designating them, drawing lines on the map, but actually having a management plan that will make a big difference. I want to end now with the Pristine Seas program. It's an ambitious goal, protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. As you said, fully protected areas are pretty small, but there are places at least designated on the map. Can you tell us about this program a bit, its impact, and how our viewers can support its work?
Pristine Seas, I started Pristine Seas in 2008 when I quit academia and moved to National Geographic to work on the cure that you mentioned before. And we combine exploration, research, media, and policy work, working with communities to inspire governments to create these large marine protected areas, these areas that protect some of the last wild places or the wildest places left in the ocean before it's too late. And what we are doing is a contribution to that global target of 30% that you mentioned. This is something that the science is converging on. We are at National Geographic. We are working with the WIS Campaign for Nature on this target because we have an opportunity next year. Next year in China, there's going to be the conference of the parties, the COP15 of the UN Convention on Biodiversity. That's the time and the place where the countries of the world are going to agree on how much more nature, how much more space we are willing to give to nature. Right now, we have 7% of the ocean in some kind of protection, 15% of the land. And the science is telling us that if we want to prevent the extinction of 1 million species and the collapse of our life support system, if we want nature to continue help us absorbing our carbon pollution from the atmosphere and helping to mitigate climate change, we need at least half of the planet in natural state. So this 30% by 2030 is a milestone. It's an absolutely necessary and unnegotiable, I would say, milestone. And there are already 32 countries in the European Commission that have supported this, that are supporting this. So we hope to get to China next year and have the world agree on doing what's right for not just for nature, but for ourselves.
Enric, thank you so much for your time today and for the work you're doing on behalf of all of us. It's so important. A link to the book, The Nature of Nature, Why We Need the Wild, is available on the website. And Enric, I hope you return in 2030 so we can do a follow-up and see that 30% of the marine areas are now protected.
A deal. And Mary, thank you so much for having me. And I hope that I'll be able to see you in person way before that.
I certainly hope so. Be well, and let's keep fighting for our marine areas.
Thank you.
Thank you.